From 1994 to 2000, a post-hardcore band from El Paso, Texas, grinded their way from venue to venue to escape the boredom of their hometown. After going through a series of lineup changes, issues dealing with record labels, and an insanely hectic touring schedule, they eventually achieved rock stardom. They became the band that all the other bands would talk about. Now, the odd thing is that it all happened so suddenly. With the release of their third album, Relationship of Command, they reinvented the post-hardcore genre. Now, probably the most interesting question to be asked here is, how did a small band from El Paso change the state of post-hardcore and rock music in just 6 years?
We're going to go watch At the Drive-In, I think you'll find.
At the Drive-In. Everyone was talking about them.
I want to go see At the Drive-In.
At the Drive-In. At the Drive-In.
At the Drive-In.
Media attention. The Clash.
Ramones.
The Sex Pistols.
Richard Hell.
In the 70s, punk rock became an evident movement in the music culture. American bands like Ramones, Johnny Thunders and the Heartbreakers, and Richard Hell and the Voidoids, and UK bands like the Sex Pistols, the Clash, and the Damned were the pioneers that made short, fast, and gritty rock music into a bigger thing. The music was often associated with anger, frustration, and wantingness to reject the mainstream culture. These guys were inspired by proto-punkers and garage rock bands from the 60s and early 70s like MC5, the Stooges, and the Sonics, musicians that made it acceptable to be outsiders. If punk rock had to be connected with one descriptive word, I think the most fitting one would be anger. But then, during the next decade, the anger got angrier. In the 80s, punk rock mutated into a series of subgenres. One of the biggest ones were hardcore. The name of the genre itself does a great job at explaining what the music sounds like. It's harder and goes straight to the core of what punk music was all about. The songs got faster, heavier, and more aggressive, and the political message got clearer and in many cases even more confrontational.
Rise above, they distort what we say. Rise above, we're gonna rise above. Right.
Black Flag, The Germs, and Circle Jerks were some of the first leading hardcore bands that sprung out of the Los Angeles scene in the beginning of the late 70s and early 80s. And together with countless other bands from San Francisco, Washington, D.C., New York, and many other music scenes, they fought Ronald Reagan, societal order, and pop culture. But the aggression of hardcore punk could only go so far before people got tired. In 1984, a band called Husker Du released Zen Arcade, an album that in many ways opened up the floodgates of creativity. Shortly said, hardcore was about to change. Bands didn't just want to be angry, fast, and outrageous anymore. They wanted to explore new musical territory by blending genres, switching lyrical themes, and introducing melancholic elements. One of the earliest post-punk bands that used melancholic melodies, singing styles, and lyrics was The Hated. They're often labeled as one of the earliest emo bands because of their ability to combine the aggression of hardcore with softer and more melodic elements. The Hated, among so many other bands, definitely helped pushing music forward. But just like punk and hardcore, post-hardcore was still a subgenre and received little to no attention by the mainstream music media. But things started to tip in the other direction when Nirvana achieved success with the release of Nevermind in '94. Major labels suddenly started looking towards smaller labels for talented underground bands. But it wasn't until the 2000s that bands in the post-punk communities really started breaking into the mainstream. And this is where bands like Glassjaw, the Blood Brothers, and of course, At the Drive-In comes into the picture. At the Drive-In was founded in El Paso, Texas back in '94. In an effort to escape the boredom of their hometown, they went on a 2,000-mile trek through Texas to play at small clubs and basements around the state. They could eventually afford a van, continued to tour as much as possible, and were lucky enough to find labels along the way for them to record a series of EPs and a couple of albums with. Their debut album, Acrobatic Tenement, was a proper post-hardcore album in many ways, but to many fans it didn't exactly sound like the band knew who they were. The punk rock aggression was there, but you couldn't feel it, which some fans have attributed to the fact that the album was recorded as a series of overdubs. Now, on their second record, In Casino Out, from '98, they changed this. They did as little overdubs as possible and recorded most of the album live. And because of that, the spirit of their punk and hardcore forefathers erupted out of the speakers.
Widows, an antique replacement, a briefcase filled with mace.
But what made At the Drive-In even more unique was that they perfectly balanced their primal aggression with angsty lyrics and melodies. One of the best examples of this is Napoleon Solo, the fourth track on the album. The track opens with a hauntingly melancholic guitar melody that sets the tone for the rest of the song. Cedric's lyrics have throughout At the Drive-In's discography been very cryptic, but this song in particular carries a very relatable story. The song was dedicated to Laura Beard and Sarah Racer, two friends of Cedric whom he had played with in the short-lived group To Fall on Deaf Ears. These girls also did backing vocals for Ludwiko Drive-In, which is a song from At the Drive-In's second EP, Alfaro Vive Carajo. Unfortunately, the girls died in a car wreck just 2 years after recording that. And in this song, he remembers when he got the phone call and was told about this accident and realized that there was nothing he could do.
Hint of suspense when that telephone rings. This is forever.
During the chorus, Cedric refers to March 23rd, the date of this tragic incident. He also tells his fans that the band might not be able to live up to their expectations because the sadness is crippling their spirit and ability to perform. But it's not just At the Drive-In's unique way of blending aggressive punk and melancholic post-hardcore that made them influential. It's also the simple fact that they're a band with a rock-solid work ethic. Over the course of 7 years, they recorded 4 EPs and 3 studio albums. Their first tour was a fucking 2,000-mile trek across Texas because they didn't have a car. Later on, they toured for months at a time with little to no breaks in between the traveling. And while all of this was going on, they were dealing with drug issues, people coming in and out of the band, and labels that refused to put out their music. What I'm trying to say is that these guys really struggled. But something happened when they met the talented producer Ross Robinson while touring.
I call it capturing the ghost. And when you capture it, it goes whoosh to whatever format you're recording.
Together with him, Fearless Records, and the Beastie Boys label Grand Royal, they went into the studio on the 7th of January in 2000 to record their magnum opus, Relationship of Command. Ross Robinson is in some settings referred to as the man who helped popularize nu metal. He had previously worked with bands such as Korn, Deftones, Sepultura, and Slipknot, so he definitely had the experience he needed to work on this album. He's known for making the artists feel like they truly give something away when they're recording, and you'll definitely hear this on the album. It's powerful and chaotic like a Trojan war. It's melancholic exactly where it needs to be, and it piques your interest with its confusing lyrics and themes. The album was released on September 12th of 2000 and catapulted the band into the mainstream rock scene. Their music video for One Armed Scissor was played on MTV. They performed on several late-night shows in the US, and many other popular bands mentioned how At the Drive-In was amongst their favorite new bands during this period.
We're going to go watch At the Drive-In, I think you'll find.
At the drive-in, everyone was talking about them.
I want to go see At the Drive-In.
At the drive-in. At the drive-in?
At the drive-in?
Yeah, they were sitting right there.
I like those guys.
So in a matter of a month, they went from being this unknown, struggling band to becoming this worldwide phenomenon. So far, we know that they borrow the aggressive sounds of punk and hardcore and the more experimental and melancholic sounds of post-hardcore. We also know that they're a band with good work ethics. They were working all throughout their hardships. But did this finely tuned mix alone help them become that influential? I would say both yes and no. The band did have a unique way of putting these genres together, but it had a lot to do with timing as well. Throughout the 90s, we saw a huge amount of cultural waves in rock music that were all very short-lived. You had Britpop, nu metal, the Riot Grrrl movement, grunge, and so many other things going on. And by the end of the 90s and the beginning of the 2000s, a lot of people were just sick and tired of these movements. Tons of people were ready to go back to the good old style of garage rock and punk. So in that way, it's not weird that At the Drive-In was caught in the updraft. Now, if you ever wonder how At the Drive-In became so influential, you'll know that it's because of their punk and hardcore aggression, post-hardcore melancholy, hard work ethic, and their timing. Thank you so much for watching. Now, if you want to learn even more about At the Drive-In, I've made a free PDF containing even more facts and stories, and I've even curated a playlist for you if you want to get into their music, if you haven't listened to them before. So make sure you click the link in the description and download that. Cheers.